I straightened the collar of my white coat before walking through the hospital doors. Not because I was nervous. I stopped being nervous a long time ago. I did it because it was the last quiet moment I was going to have all day, and I knew it. My brother's wedding was in 6 hours. I had a double shift ending at noon, 3 post-op consultations after that, and a rehearsal dinner I had already been told twice that I was expected to attend on time for once. The voice in my head delivering that line belonged to my mother. It always did. I clipped my badge to my lapel. Dr. Elena Marsh, attending physician, cardiovascular surgery. I had earned those words one sleepless year at a time, and I still felt something settle in my chest every time I read them. My pager went off before I reached the elevator. That was how it always started. Growing up, I was the one who didn't fit. My brother Daniel was the Golden One varsity lacrosse. Student council president, the kind of person who walked into rooms and made them louder just by existing. My mother used to say he had a gift for people. She said it the way she never said anything about me. I was quieter. I spent weekends at the library when other kids were at parties. I took apart my father's old radio when I was 9 to see how it worked, put it back together wrong the first time, and right the second. My father thought that was funny. My mother thought it was odd. When I got into Johns Hopkins pre-med at 17, my mother told the neighbors I was going into healthcare, like I was going to be a receptionist, like the word doctor was too presumptuous to attach to me yet. Daniel got a party. I got a nod. I told myself it didn't matter. I had work to do. Medical school was the first place I ever felt like I made sense. The hours were brutal, and the pressure was constant, and I loved every second of it in the way you can only love something that demands everything from you. My attendings pushed hard. I pushed back harder. By my 3rd year, one of my professors told me I had the steadiest hands he'd seen in a decade of teaching. I didn't tell my mother that. She would have found a way to make it smaller. Residency took me to Boston, then a fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery in Houston. 7 years of training after medical school, and I missed Daniel's college graduation, 2 Christmases, and my cousin's baby shower. My mother kept a running tally. She brought it up at every phone call like she was reading from a ledger. Daniel never misses things, she said once, during a call I had stepped out of a procedure to answer. I was standing in a hallway in scrubs, still wearing a surgical cap, and my hands were shaking slightly from adrenaline. I had just helped save a 43-year-old woman's life. Her name was Margaret. She had 3 kids. I didn't say any of that. I said, "I know, Mom," and I went back to work. I joined Mercy General 6 months after finishing my fellowship. At 29, I was one of the youngest cardiovascular surgeons on staff. I was also the only woman in my division for the first 2 years. The first week, one of the senior attendings handed me a chart and asked me to flag down the surgical resident when I had a chance. He thought I was a nurse. I corrected him politely. He apologized. We moved on. That was the version I told when people asked. The version I didn't tell was that it happened 3 more times that month, with 3 different people, and every single time I corrected them with the same level voice and the same straight posture, and I went home and ran 6 miles on the treadmill until I couldn't think anymore. I didn't have the luxury of being rattled. Rattled people make mistakes. I couldn't afford mistakes. So I didn't rattle, I just worked. My brother got engaged to a woman named Courtney 2 years after I started at Mercy General. She was pleasant enough, bubbly, well-dressed, the kind of person who hosted brunches and remembered everyone's coffee orders. I had nothing against her. We just had nothing in common. Daniel called to tell me about the engagement during a week when I had back-to-back surgeries and was surviving on 4 hours of sleep and vending machine coffee. I congratulated him. I meant it. I told him I was happy for him. I was. He said, "You'll actually be there this time, right? Like at the wedding?" I said, "I'll be there." He said, "Courtney's already worried you'll bail." I said, "I'll be there, Daniel." There was a pause. Then, "Mom thinks you're going to show up in scrubs." I almost laughed. "Tell Mom I own other clothes." He laughed too. It was a good moment. We had them sometimes, my brother and I, these flashes of something easy between us. And then they passed, and we went back to being strangers who shared a last name. The wedding was set for a Saturday in late October. Daniel and Courtney chose a venue outside the city, a renovated farmhouse with string lights and exposed wood beams, and a ceremony space that held 200 guests. I had seen the pictures in the group chat I checked maybe once a week. I requested the day off 8 months in advance. I arranged coverage. I bought a dress, a deep navy blue, knee-length, understated, and I had it dry cleaned and hung on the back of my closet door where I would not forget it. I was not going to bail. I was going to be there. I had said so. What I had not planned for was that my chief of surgery, Dr. Warren, would pull me aside 3 weeks before the wedding to tell me that the hospital board was reviewing candidates for a newly created position, Director of Cardiovascular Surgery, a role that had never existed at Mercy General before. A role they were building, essentially, from scratch. He told me I was on the short list. He told me the final decision would be announced at the hospital's annual gala. The gala was scheduled for the Friday night before my brother's wedding. I told him I had a conflict. He said, "Elena, this doesn't happen twice." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the fellowship. I thought about the years. I thought about Margaret and her 3 kids and every other name I kept filed somewhere behind my sternum. I said, "I'll make it work." I did not tell my family about the gala. I did not tell them about the position. I had learned, somewhere around the time I started residency, that sharing things before they were certain with my family only gave them more material. More ways to say probably not, or that seems like a stretch, or my personal favorite, my mother's specialty. Silence. That particular silence that said everything she wasn't saying. I kept it to myself. I worked. I waited. I showed up to every shift and every procedure and every late-night consult, and I did not let myself think too far ahead, because that was how you got sloppy. The Friday night of the gala, I changed in my office. I kept a garment bag there for occasions, a habit I'd developed after missing too many things because I'd gone home first and lost an hour. The dress I'd brought was black. Simple. I did my own hair. I had learned to be fast about these things. The event was held in the hospital's main atrium, which had been transformed with lighting and round tables and flowers. The staff cleaned up well. I found myself smiling at that. There is something genuinely strange and sweet about seeing people you know primarily in scrubs wearing cocktail attire. Dr. Warren gave a speech. He thanked the board. He thanked the staff. Then he announced the new position, and he said my name, and the room applauded. And I stood at my table and accepted the handshakes and the hugs and kept my face composed because I had been trained by 7 years of surgical residency and a lifetime of not being the kind of person who lets things stay level when the ground shifts. Afterward, in the parking garage, I sat in my car for 4 minutes. Then I drove to the rehearsal dinner. I was 45 minutes late. Nobody had saved me a seat. My mother found me by the appetizer table. She looked at my dress, then at my face, then said, "You look tired." I said, "I came from work." She said, "You always come from work." Courtney appeared beside her, luminous in a cream-wrap dress, and said, "Elena, you made it." With the particular brightness of someone who had genuinely not expected me to. She hugged me. I hugged her back. Then my brother materialized, already loosened by a few drinks, and he grinned and said, "Look who showed up." I said, "I told you I would." He said, "Yeah, but you say that." I let it go. I was good at letting things go by then. You have to be, in my line of work. You cannot carry everything or you will not be able to lift your hands. The wedding day was clear and cold. The kind of October day that looks like a painting, everything gold and sharp-edged and perfect. I arrived at the venue early. I helped Courtney's sister with a zipper that wasn't cooperating. I stood in the right places in the right order for the photographs. I was wearing the navy dress, the one I had planned. The one that was appropriate and pressed and exactly what anyone would have expected. Which was why, when Courtney's maid of honor made the comment, it landed so strangely. We were in the side room off the main hall bridal party. A few family members, the general chaos of pre-ceremony, and someone asked if I'd heard back about a job thing I'd mentioned to Daniel months ago. Before I could answer, my mother said, "Elena's always chasing the next thing." And then Courtney's maid of honor, a woman named Brianna, who I had met exactly twice, laughed and said, "Is that why she looks like she's dressed for a board meeting? No offense." The room didn't stop. It wasn't that dramatic. A few people smiled. My mother said nothing. Daniel was across the room and didn't hear it. I looked at Brianna. I said, "None taken. 8. Rife. 2. 8. I, 2, and I turned back to the conversation I'd been part of before she'd interrupted it. But I felt it. The way you feel a cold draft from a window you thought was closed. That specific flavor of being dismissed in a room where you expected, if not warmth, at least neutrality. I knew that feeling. I had been navigating it my entire life. In classrooms and hospital corridors and conference rooms, where I was the youngest, the only woman, the one who had to prove the obvious over and over again, I straightened my back. I fixed my expression. I went and sat down for the ceremony. What happened next was not something I planned. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. I did not arrange it. I did not orchestrate it. I did not make any calls, or send any texts, or set anything in motion. What happened was simply this. My colleagues came to the wedding, not because they were invited, they were not, or most of them weren't. But Dr. Warren had heard me mention, once, months ago, that my brother was getting married at Fernwood Farms. And apparently he had mentioned it to someone, who mentioned it to someone else. And at some point it became one of those things that passes through a department the way these things do quietly, without announcement. The ceremony had just ended. We had moved from the ceremony space toward the reception hall, and there was that loose, happy interval where people mill around outside and take photographs in the afternoon light, and nobody quite knows where to stand. I had stepped away from the group. I needed a moment alone, which I almost never allowed myself. But the comment from Brianna was still sitting in my chest like a splinter, and I needed 30 seconds to put it somewhere I couldn't feel it. I was standing near the edge of the property, looking at the tree line, when I heard the sound of car doors. Multiple car doors. I turned. There were 4 cars in the gravel lot, and stepping out of them in their actual clothes, in their weekend clothes, in the ordinary human way that people look when they are not at work, were people I recognized. Dr. Patterson from cardiology. The Nguyen twins from the surgical ICU. Teresa, my scrub tech, who had worked beside me for 3 years and whose steadiness I trusted more than almost anyone's. Marcus from the cath lab. Dr. Simmons, who was 72 years old and had forgotten more about the human heart than most people would ever learn, and who I had not expected to see outside of hospital walls for the rest of my natural life. And behind them, Dr. Warren. He spotted me from across the lot and raised a hand, not a wave, just an acknowledgement, the way he did in the hallway when passing between meetings. They were not wearing formal clothes. They had not come to be part of the event. They had come, I understood this without anyone saying it, because they wanted to be there. Because word had gotten out about the appointment. Because these were people who had watched me work for years and apparently decided, privately and collectively, that this was a moment worth showing up for. They stayed at the edge of the property. They were not intrusive. Doctor. Warren spoke quietly to one of the venue staff, and I saw the staff member nod. I walked back toward the reception hall. I did not say anything to anyone. I didn't know what I would have said. The reception began. Dinner was served. Daniel gave a toast that was funny and warm and entirely him. Courtney's father gave a toast that went 4 minutes too long and made 3 people cry. The band started up, people danced. I sat at a table near the back with Daniel's college friends and their spouses, people who were perfectly kind and had no idea what I did and were not particularly interested in finding out, which was fine. I didn't need them to be. My mother was at the head table. Brianna was beside her, already on her 3rd glass of champagne. At some point, Brianna leaned across the table toward my mother and said something that made my mother glance in my direction. I caught the tail end of it. Something about the hospital. Something about a big announcement. Her voice carried more than she realized. My mother looked at me with the expression I had seen my entire life. The one that was not quite pride and not quite suspicion, and lived somewhere uncomfortable in between. I held her gaze for a moment. Then I looked away. The band had just finished a song when the venue door opened and Dr. Warren stepped inside. He did not make an entrance. He was not that kind of man. He found the venue coordinator, exchanged a few quiet words, and the coordinator walked to where the band was set up and said something brief to the lead musician. The music stopped. The room looked up the way rooms do when the music stops unexpectedly, not alarmed, just suddenly aware. Doctor? Warren walked to the center of the floor. He had a glass in his hand. He tapped it once. He said, "I apologize for the interruption. I'll be brief." He looked at me across the room. He said, "Last night, the Board of Mercy General made a decision that has been a long time coming. Effective the 1st of the year, Dr. Elena Marsh will serve as the hospital's first director of cardiovascular surgery." He paused. "She doesn't know I'm doing this," he added, and there was quiet laughter. But some things shouldn't wait for a Monday morning email. Then, he raised his glass. And from the doorway, because they had apparently been standing just outside it for the last 20 minutes, my colleagues filed in. Teresa and Marcus and Dr. Patterson and the Nguyen twins and Dr. Simmons, who was 72 years old and was not smiling, which was how you knew he meant it. They stood. Every single one of them stood, the way people stand for something they respect, without anyone telling them to. The room was very quiet. Then Teresa started to clap, and it moved through the room like something catching fire. And people were on their feet, Daniel's college friends, the cousins I had barely spoken to, people who did not know me at all, and the sound was enormous for a renovated farmhouse in October, and I sat very still in the middle of it and did not trust my face. I looked at my brother. Daniel was standing. He was clapping. And he was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, not the easy grin, not the comfortable warmth he turned on everyone, something quieter and more complicated. Something that looked, if I was reading it right, like he was seeing me for the first time. I looked at my mother. She was standing too. She was not clapping. She was holding her glass in both hands and looking at me, and her mouth was pressed into a line that was not a smile, but was not the other thing either. It was something suspended in between, and I had never seen that particular expression on her face, and I did not know exactly what it meant. I didn't need to know. Not right then. I stood up. I looked at Dr. Warren. I nodded once the way I did in the hallway, the way we communicated across operating rooms, and he nodded back. Teresa caught my eye from the doorway and gave me the small, private smile she'd given me every time we finished a hard surgery together. The one that meant we did it. Let's go home. I almost lost it right there. I didn't, but it was close. The rest of the evening moved differently. Lighter, somehow. Daniel pulled me aside after the toasts and hugged me for the first time in years, a real one, not the perfunctory kind, and said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "I didn't want to make it about me." He looked at me like he was recalibrating something. He said, "Elena, when's the last time anything was about you?" I didn't have an answer for that. Brianna found me near the dessert table later and said, "Congratulations," she hadn't known. Her tone was pleasant and slightly uncomfortable, and I understood that the discomfort was doing the work an apology would have done, and I accepted it. I wasn't carrying anything by then. I didn't have the room. Dr. Simmons shook my hand before he left. He had large, very steady hands, the hands of someone who had spent 50 years keeping people alive. He held mine for a moment and said, "Don't let the title change how you move in a room." I said I won't. He nodded once and walked out. My mother found me at the end of the night, when the band was winding down and the venue staff had started quietly clearing glasses. She stood beside me for a moment without saying anything. We looked at the dance floor together. Then she said, "I didn't know it was going to be this big." I said, "I didn't either." She said, "Your father would have liked to see this." I didn't say anything. My father had been gone 6 years. She didn't talk about him often. The fact that she was talking about him now meant something. I wasn't sure what. After a moment she said, "You always did work too hard." I waited. "I suppose," she said slowly, "it was for something." It was not an apology. It was not a declaration. It was the smallest possible acknowledgement, delivered in the flattest possible tone, by a woman who had spent 30-some years struggling to see me. It was also, I realized, the most she had ever given me. I said, "Thanks, Mom." She patted my hand once, then she went to find her coat. I stayed until almost midnight. I helped stack chairs because the venue coordinator looked exhausted, and I had the energy and the instinct old hospital habit. Nobody is too important to help clean up. Teresa stayed with me. We worked in comfortable silence, the way we always did. When the last table was cleared, she said, "You know they're going to make your life impossible now, the expectations." I said, "Yeah." She said, "You ready for that?" I thought about it. I thought about the 18-year-old who had taken apart a radio to understand how it worked. I thought about the resident who stayed 3 hours past the end of every shift. I thought about Margaret and her 3 kids and every name after hers. I thought about what Dr. Simmons had said. Don't let the title change how you move in a room. I picked up the last chair. I said, "I've been ready." And I meant it. Not because I was certain nothing would be hard. Everything was going to be hard. The title was going to bring new pressure and new resistance and new versions of every old battle I'd already fought. But I had been fighting those battles quietly for a decade and a half. and I had not stopped, and I had not bent. And the result was that 200 people had stood up in a farmhouse on a Friday night in October because of what that steadiness had built. You don't need anyone to make noise for you. You just need to keep standing until the room figures out who you are. And then it does.